Welcome to today's video where we're going to dive into one of the most talked about issues in the UK today: social cuts under the current Labour government. From benefit reductions to cuts in heating allowances, these decisions are sparking major debates across the country. Whether you're feeling the impact directly or are just curious about what's going on, stick with me because we're going to unpack it all. Before we start, don't forget to subscribe if you want to stay updated on important political and social issues affecting Great Britain. But now, let's get into it. First, let's provide some context. The Labour Party traditionally positions itself as a party that supports working people, focusing on welfare, public services and social equality. However, even within Labour's tenure, especially as governments are forced to make difficult economic decisions, social cuts are sometimes necessary. At least that's the argument from some policymakers. But what exactly do we mean by social cuts? Social cuts refer to reductions in government spending on public welfare programs like pensions, benefits, housing support, and services that are intended to help the most vulnerable in society, people who are unemployed, elderly, disabled, or living in poverty. And in recent months, we've seen a series of such cuts in the UK, particularly under the leadership of the current Labour government. One of the most significant cuts that made headlines recently is the reduction of the heating allowance. We'll dive into that in a moment, but first, let's explore the wider scope of these cuts and why they are happening at all. You might be asking, why is the Labour government, a party traditionally committed to social welfare, making these cuts? The answer lies in a combination of economic challenges, political pressures, and shifting priorities. The UK, like many other countries, is facing enormous financial pressures. Rising inflation, the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the ongoing cost of living crisis have strained public finances. In response, the government has had to reconsider how it spends its money. There's a significant focus on reducing the national deficit and managing debt, and this often means trimming down spending on social programs, which unfortunately impacts millions of people who rely on these benefits. But it's not just about finances. There's also a political element at play. Labour, under its current leadership, has been trying to appeal to a broader base of voters. This has included attempts to demonstrate fiscal responsibility, showing that they can balance the books while still investing in the future of the country. But the question we need to ask is, who's bearing the brunt of these cuts? And is the balance tipping too far in the wrong direction? Now let's talk about one of the most controversial cuts, that's the reduction of the heating allowance. For those unfamiliar, the heating allowance is a benefit designed to help elderly and vulnerable people manage their energy bills, particularly during the winter months when heating costs skyrocket. Just recently, the Labour government announced a reduction in this allowance. And this decision has sparked outrage from pensioner groups, charities, and many ordinary citizens who are concerned about how the elderly will cope as energy prices continue to rise. The government's argument is that the cut is part of a wider plan to streamline benefits and reduce spending in areas where they feel there's overlap or inefficiency. But the critics argue that this will leave thousands, if not millions, of people without enough support to keep their homes warm. For many, it's not just an inconvenience, it's a matter of survival, especially for those living on fixed incomes. And let's not forget the context here. Britain is still facing a cost of living crisis. Energy bills are soaring, inflation is still not where it's supposed to be, and wages for many have stagnated. And cutting the heating allowance at this time seems to many like a move that will deepen the crisis for the most vulnerable. But the heating allowance isn't the only area seeing cuts. Other key programs have been affected as well. For example, there has been a reduction in the universal credit uplift that was introduced during the COVID-19 pandemic. This temporary increase helped millions of low-income families, but it has now been rolled back. And there have also been changes to disability benefits and housing support with tighter eligibility criteria and reduced payouts. For many people, these cuts are a double blow. They are already struggling with the rising food and housing costs, and now they have less government support to help them manage. And the impact of these cuts is not just financial. Many of the people affected are dealing with anxiety, stress, and in some cases, the very real fear of losing their homes or being unable to afford basic necessities. But what has the political reaction been? Unsurprisingly, the cuts have been met with fierce opposition. Opposition parties, including the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats, have accused the Labour government of betraying its core values by abandoning vulnerable citizens. And meanwhile, within Labour itself, there's been some division. Left-wing members of the party have criticized the government's approach, arguing that cuts to social welfare should never be a solution, particularly in times of economic hardship. It's also important to note that public sentiment is shifting. Recent polls show that trust in the Labour government's ability to manage social welfare is declining, particularly among working-class voters and pensioners, groups that have traditionally been Labour's strongholds, at least the not-so-wealthy pensioners. But where do we go from here? The government has made it clear that it intends to continue down this path, with further cuts possibly on the horizon as they look to balance the budget, which really needs balance, by the way. But what's critical is how this plays out in the long term. If these cuts push more people into poverty or worsen existing inequalities, the political fallout could be severe. On the other hand, if Labour can justify the cuts by showing economic stability or future growth, they may weather the storm. But one thing is certain, the debate over social cuts isn't going away anytime soon. And it's a reflection of the larger questions that governments around the world are grappling with. How to balance economic responsibility with the need to protect the most vulnerable in society. As we wrap up today's discussion, it's clear that the social cuts in Great Britain, particularly under a current Labour government, are having a profound impact. While the government argues that these are necessary steps to ensure fiscal responsibility, the reality for many is much harsher. And if you've been affected by these cuts, or if you have strong feelings about the government's approach, let me know in the comments below this video. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. And if you found this video informative, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more in-depth analysis on politics and social issues. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video that you find right here in the end screen.